The stagecoach rattled through the Dakota Territory, each bump sending sharp pains through Sarah Mitchell's bruised ribs. She pressed her hand against the window, watching endless prairie grass bend under October winds. 23 years old, and she felt ancient. The other passengers tried making conversation, but she only nodded or shook her head. Words had abandoned her 2 years ago, the night her husband's fists finally stopped and his breathing went silent on the bedroom floor. Self-defense, the Boston court had ruled. But society's judgment cut deeper than any legal verdict. The whispers followed her through every street, every shop, every church pew. Women clutched their husbands tighter when she passed. Men looked at her with either fear or a disturbing kind of curiosity. Her own family suggested she disappear west, start fresh where nobody knew her story. So here she was, bound for a teaching position at a missionary school near Fort Robinson, carrying nothing but 2 trunks and a silence that had become her shield. The driver's shout interrupted her thoughts. Through the dust, she saw riders approaching fast. 6 men on painted horses, their long black hair streaming behind them. Lakota warriors. Sarah's heart hammered, but she felt oddly calm. Perhaps death would be simpler than this half-life she'd been living. The stagecoach lurched to a stop. The driver's rifle clattered to the ground before he could raise it. One warrior, taller than the others, dismounted with fluid grace. He wore traditional buckskins decorated with intricate quill work, and a single eagle feather hung from his hair. His face was striking, all sharp angles and intense dark eyes that seemed to see straight through her. He spoke in Lakota to his companions, then switched to perfect English. "We need the medicine supplies you carry. No one will be harmed if you cooperate." The other passengers scrambled to offer their belongings. Sarah watched the tall warrior move through the coach with careful efficiency. He wasn't ransacking or destroying, just searching. When he reached her seat, his eyes met hers, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe recognition of a kindred spirit. "Your bags," he said quietly, not a threat but almost an apology. She gestured toward her trunks on top. He studied her face, noting her silence, the way she communicated without words. A small nod of understanding passed between them. He climbed up, opened her trunks, found nothing of interest, and closed them with unexpected gentleness. Then gunfire cracked across the prairie. Soldiers from Fort Robinson, drawn by reports of Lakota in the area. The warriors scattered to their horses. The tall one vaulted onto his paint stallion, but turned back once, his gaze finding Sarah again through the chaos. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that both carried wounds no one else could see. The soldiers arrived in a thunder of hooves, their lieutenant demanding information. The other passengers babbled stories of savage Indians and narrow escape. When the lieutenant turned to Sarah, she simply looked at him. He grew frustrated with her silence, assuming she was hysterical from fear. "Damned woman's in shock," he muttered. "Get them to the fort." At Fort Robinson, chaos reigned. A measles outbreak had struck the Lakota people forced onto the nearby reservation, and the army had confiscated the medicine shipment meant for them, claiming it was needed for soldiers first. Sarah pieced together the situation through overheard conversations. The tall warrior and his companions hadn't been raiders but desperate men trying to save their people from a disease that white settlers had brought. That night, in the sparse room the missionary school provided, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept seeing those dark eyes, that moment of recognition. For 2 years, she'd felt invisible, her silence making her a ghost moving through the world. But that warrior had seen her. Really seen her. Not the killer, not the victim, not the mute curiosity, but something essential underneath all those labels. She rose and walked to the window. Somewhere out there, beyond the fort's walls, people were dying while medicine sat in locked storage. The injustice burned in her chest, fierce and bright. Maybe silence wasn't the only way to survive. Morning arrived with bitter cold and news of 3 Lakota children dead from measles overnight. Sarah stood in the missionary school's kitchen, methodically preparing breakfast while the other teachers discussed the tragedy with casual callousness. "Savages don't know proper hygiene," Mrs. Garrett pronounced, slicing bread with aggressive efficiency. "Disease follows them like flies to carrion." Sarah's hands tightened on the pot she was scrubbing. She'd witnessed plenty of disease in Boston's tenements, where white children died in equal numbers from overcrowding and poverty. Savagery had nothing to do with it. "Miss Mitchell, you'll accompany me to the reservation today," Reverend Thompson announced, entering the kitchen. "We need to assess which children might be salvageable for Christian education, assuming they survive this outbreak." Salvageable. The word made Sarah's stomach turn. She nodded her agreement, as she always did, her silence accepted as appropriate feminine submission rather than what it truly was, a locked cage she'd built around herself. The wagon ride to the reservation revealed a landscape of suffering. Makeshift shelters dotted the designated lands, families crowded into spaces never meant for permanent habitation. The proud warriors she'd glimpsed yesterday were reduced to waiting in lines for inadequate government rations, their traditional hunting grounds stolen by treaties signed under duress and broken at white convenience. Children played despite everything, their laughter a defiant spark against the bleakness. Sarah watched a small girl weaving dried grass into a doll, her concentration absolute. The girl looked up, smiled, and offered the doll to Sarah. The simple generosity cracked something in Sarah's chest. "Don't accept gifts," Reverend Thompson warned. "It encourages dependence." Sarah took the doll anyway, cradling it gently. The girl's smile widened. Her mother appeared from a nearby shelter, wariness in her eyes, but also gratitude that someone treated her daughter with kindness. Then Sarah saw him. The tall warrior from yesterday, crouched beside a shelter where smoke rose from a fire pit. He was tending to someone inside, his movements careful and practiced. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by something more complex. Curiosity. Concern. An unspoken question about why she was here. Reverend Thompson followed her line of sight. "That's Nakoma," means chief in their tongue, though he's technically just a war leader. Troublemaker, the fort captain calls him. Always questioning why his people don't receive the supplies promised by treaty. Nakoma straightened, walking toward them with purposeful strides. Up close, Sarah could see exhaustion carved into his features, the weight of responsibility for dying people. When he spoke, his voice carried barely controlled anger. "Reverend, more children died this morning. The medicine your people confiscated would have saved them. How do you justify this to your merciful God?" "The Lord works in mysterious ways, son. Perhaps this is meant to humble your people, teach them." "Teach us what?" Nakoma's voice cut sharp. "That white promises are worthless? That our children's lives matter less than your soldiers' comfort? We already know these lessons." His eyes moved to Sarah, standing slightly behind the Reverend. She met his gaze directly, refusing to look away. Something in her expression must have conveyed her own anger at the injustice, because his intensity softened slightly. "You," he said. "From the stagecoach. Why do you not speak?" Reverend Thompson stepped forward. "Miss Mitchell suffered a trauma. The Lord has seen fit to take her voice. It's not appropriate for you to question." Nakoma ignored him, keeping his focus on Sarah. "Did someone hurt you into silence, or did you choose it as armor?" The question struck her like a physical blow. In 2 years, no one had understood that her silence was both wound and weapon, prison and protection. She stared at this stranger who somehow saw the truth everyone else missed. "That's quite enough," Reverend Thompson sputtered. "Miss Mitchell, return to the wagon immediately." But Sarah didn't move. Nakoma watched her with those penetrating dark eyes, waiting. She lifted her hand slowly, touching her throat, then her chest, then making a gesture of something locked and chained. A crude explanation, but it was more than she'd communicated to anyone in 2 years. Nakoma nodded slowly. "I understand. But you should know that voice and speech are not the same thing. You are speaking very clearly right now." Reverend Thompson grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her away. She stumbled but caught herself, looking back at Nakoma. He raised his hand in a small gesture of farewell or perhaps acknowledgement. As the wagon pulled away, Sarah clutched the grass doll the little girl had given her, feeling something shift in her chest. A crack in the silence. That night, Sarah couldn't purge Nakoma's words from her mind. Voice and speech are not the same thing. She paced her small room, the grass doll on her windowsill catching moonlight. Beyond the fort's walls, more children were dying from a disease that medicine could cure, medicine that sat 50 yards away in a locked storehouse. The injustice festered like an infected wound. For 2 years, Sarah had remained silent, believing her voice dangerous. She'd killed a man with her own hands, felt his pulse stop under her fingers as she fought for her life. The court called it self-defense, but she'd still ended a human life. Didn't that make her words too violent to speak? Didn't that make her too broken to have opinions that mattered? But children were dying while men debated policy and pride. At midnight, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She slipped from her room, moving through shadows with the practiced stealth of someone who'd spent 2 years trying to remain unseen. The fort's storehouse stood guarded by a single drowsy soldier. She waited, patient as stone, until his head nodded forward in sleep. The lock was simple, Sarah had watched her father work his locksmith trade as a child, his patient hands teaching her the language of pins and tumblers. The mechanism clicked open with barely a whisper. Inside, crates of medical supplies lined the walls. She found the measles treatments, wrapped them in her shawl, and slipped back into darkness. Leaving the fort meant climbing the palisade wall where shadows gathered thickest. Her hands scraped on rough wood, splinters driving deep, but she barely noticed. At the top, she paused, looking out at the vast prairie painted silver by moonlight. Freedom or death lay beyond that wall, and both seemed preferable to continued silence while children suffered. She dropped into tall grass on the other side, landed hard, and ran. The reservation sprawled 3 miles northeast. She knew exactly which direction because she'd watched Sunset's position from the wagon earlier. Boston streets had taught her navigation, how to mark paths and remember routes when being lost meant danger. The prairie at night teemed with sounds. Wind whispered through grass. Something howled in the distance. Sarah's breath came in gasps, her corset restricting her ribs, but she pushed forward. The medical supplies pressed against her chest, precious and heavy. Halfway to the reservation, a rider emerged from darkness. Sarah's heart stopped. The paint stallion was unmistakable even in moonlight. Nakoma brought his horse to a stop 10 feet away, his expression unreadable. "You're either very brave or very foolish," he said quietly. "Soldiers will discover the theft by morning. They'll assume my people took it, might use it as excuse to withhold more supplies or punish us further." Sarah's hands tightened on the bundle of medicine. She hadn't considered that consequence. Her noble gesture might cause more harm than good. Nakoma dismounted, approaching slowly. "But you knew children were dying and decided someone should do something, even if it cost you everything. That takes courage." He studied her face in the moonlight, seeing something that made his expression soften. "You're trembling. Not from fear, but from rage at injustice. I recognize it because I feel the same fury every day, watching my people suffer while promises remain broken." Sarah met his eyes, and something passed between them. Understanding. Recognition. Two people pushed to extremes by impossible situations, making desperate choices because remaining passive hurt worse than any consequence. "Give me the medicine," Nakoma said. "I'll ensure it reaches those who need it most, and I'll make certain the fort knows I took it, not you. You can return safely." But Sarah shook her head firmly. She'd started this, and she'd see it through. If punishment came, she'd face it. For 2 years, she'd hidden from consequences, letting silence shield her from the world. But Nakoma was right, voice and speech weren't the same. She'd been speaking her truth through actions all along, had spoken her truth when she'd fought back against her husband's violence, had spoken it again tonight by refusing to let injustice continue unchallenged. Nakoma watched her internal struggle play across her face. Then he smiled, the expression transforming his features. "You're stubborn. I like that. Come, then. We'll deliver this medicine together, and face whatever comes afterward side by side." He offered his hand. Sarah hesitated only a moment before taking it. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. He pulled her up behind him on the paint stallion, and she wrapped her arms around his waist to keep balance. The horse surged forward, carrying them toward the reservation lights. "What's your name?" Nakoma asked over his shoulder. Sarah's throat worked, trying to form sounds she'd suppressed for 2 years. Nothing emerged but a rough exhale. "It's all right," Nakoma said gently. "I'll know it when you're ready to share it." The reservation transformed in firelight. Families gathered around the flames as Nakoma distributed the stolen medicine with careful precision. An elder woman Sarah would later learn was called Grandmother Willow took charge of administering treatments, her weathered hands steady and sure as she tended to fevered children. Sarah watched, feeling both useful and utterly inadequate. These people faced diseases brought by her culture, their traditional healing practices disrupted by forced confinement, their medicine men forbidden from gathering herbs that grew beyond reservation boundaries. The stolen supplies were a temporary measure against systemic destruction. Nakoma appeared at her elbow, 2 tin cups in hand. "Sage tea. It won't cure measles, but it provides comfort." Sarah accepted the cup, their fingers brushing. The touch sent unexpected warmth through her. She'd avoided physical contact for 2 years, flinching from any hand that reached toward her. But Nakoma's presence felt different, safe in a way she'd forgotten existed. "Tell me your story," he said, settling on the ground and gesturing for her to join him. "Not with words if they won't come. But tell me how someone like you ends up at a missionary school, stealing medicine in the middle of the night." Sarah sat, the grass doll still clutched in her hand. In the firelight, with Nakoma's patient gaze upon her, something unlocked in her chest. She began to gesture, to mime, to sketch pictures in the dirt. Her marriage. Her husband's escalating violence. The final night when survival meant becoming a killer. The trial. The whispers. The suffocating silence she'd chosen because speaking meant explaining, and explaining meant reliving trauma over and over. Nakoma listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as he understood. When she finished, silence stretched between them, but it felt different from her usual silence, shared rather than isolating. "My wife died 3 winters ago," Nakoma finally said, voice low. "Smallpox. Another gift from white settlement. She was carrying our first child. I was away negotiating with the fort captain, trying to secure better food rations. By the time I returned, she was already gone." He stared into the flames, memories dancing in his eyes. "I blamed myself. If I'd been there, maybe I could have saved her. If I'd fought harder against the treaties that confined us here, maybe she'd never have been exposed. Guilt and anger became my constant companions." Sarah reached out tentatively, placing her hand over his. He turned his palm up, lacing their fingers together. The simple connection felt profound, 2 damaged people offering silent comfort. "You killed to protect yourself," Nakoma said. "That makes you a warrior, not a murderer. In my culture, we honor those who defend themselves and others. Your silence, it's like a wound that hasn't healed properly because no one acknowledged the battle you survived." Tears burned Sarah's eyes. In 2 years, no one had framed it that way. She'd been pitied, judged, whispered about, but never honored for surviving. "The strongest warriors I know," Nakoma continued, "they all carry scars. Some visible, some hidden. What matters isn't avoiding injury but how we move forward despite the wounds." Before Sarah could respond, shouting erupted near the reservation entrance. Torches blazed as soldiers poured in, led by the fort captain himself. Reverend Thompson stood beside him, pointing directly at Sarah. "There," the Reverend shouted. "That's the woman who stole from us." Nakoma stood swiftly, placing himself between Sarah and the approaching soldiers. "The medicine was taken by me," he declared loudly. "This woman had nothing to do with it." "That's a lie," Captain Morrison snapped. "The guard saw a woman fleeing toward the reservation. We tracked her here." Grandmother Willow emerged from the shadows, carrying a fevered child whose breathing came in labored gasps. "This baby would be dead by morning without that medicine. How many children must die before you honor your treaty promises?" "Treaties are political matters," Morrison replied coldly. "Theft is a crime. Miss Mitchell, you're under arrest." Sarah stepped forward, moving past Nakoma despite his attempt to shield her. She met Captain Morrison's gaze directly, refusing to lower her eyes in submission. 2 years of silence had taught her that people heard what they wanted to hear regardless of words. Her actions would speak louder. She pointed at the sick child, then at the medicine supplies, then at the captain. The message was clear: choosing protocol over children's lives made him the real criminal. Defiant savage sympathizer, Morrison spat. "You'll face military tribunal for this." "Then I stand beside her," Nakoma said firmly. "We face it together." "Me too," a voice called from the crowd. Grandmother Willow stepped forward. Then others joined, Lakota men and women who'd watched Sarah steal medicine to save their children. Even some of the missionary teachers who'd witnessed the fort's deliberate cruelty stepped forward. Captain Morrison's face reddened. "You're all complicit in theft from the United States Army. I could arrest everyone here." "Do it," Nakoma challenged. "Arrest grandmothers and sick children and teachers. Send word to newspapers in the East about how the Great American Army protects medicine from dying Indian babies. See how that plays with your senators and their treaty committees." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Sarah barely breathed, aware that her impulsive theft had sparked something larger. The gathered crowd represented a crack in the system, people refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. Dawn broke over an improbable scene. Sarah sat beside Nakoma outside Captain Morrison's office, both under guard but not in chains. The captain had realized Nakoma's threat wasn't empty. Telegrams to Eastern newspapers would create political nightmares. Instead, he'd called for a council to address the situation. The meeting included fort officers, tribal elders, missionary representatives, and several Lakota leaders. Sarah remained silent, but her presence spoke volumes. A white woman risking everything to help Lakota children challenged the clean narrative of civilization versus savagery. Grandmother Willow spoke first, her voice carrying the weight of witnessed history. You take our land, kill our buffalo, force our children into schools that beat their language away, and wonder why we distrust your promises. This woman showed more honor in one night than your government has shown in decades. Reverend Thompson shifted uncomfortably. Surely we can find middle ground. Miss Mitchell acted inappropriately, but her intentions. Her intentions saved lives, Nakoma interrupted. While you debated and delayed, children died. She acted when none of you would. Captain Morrison leaned back in his chair. Nevertheless, theft occurred. Army property was taken without authorization. There must be consequences. Then let the consequences fall on me, Nakoma said. I'll accept punishment if it means the medical supplies continue flowing to my people as originally promised by treaty. Sarah grabbed a paper and pencil from the captain's desk. Her hand shook, but she wrote clearly, I will not let him take blame for my actions. Arrest me if you must, but honor your treaties. The words felt strange after 2 years of written silence. But they needed saying. Captain Morrison read the note aloud, surprise flickering across his face. So she can communicate when motivated. Makes the theft seem more calculated, doesn't it? It makes her brave, one of the fourth lieutenants said unexpectedly. Sir, with respect, our men know those medical supplies sat unused while children died. Morale's been poor over it. Many soldiers joined the army to protect people, not watch them suffer. The captain's jaw tightened. He understood the political reality. Punishing Sarah would create martyrs and scandals, while using this situation to improve relations might enhance his reputation as a fair commander. Here's my decision, Morrison finally said. The medical supplies will be distributed as originally intended. Miss Mitchell will face no charges, but she'll be dismissed from the missionary school. The supply system will be reviewed to ensure treaty obligations are properly met. And Nakoma, you and your people will cease all raids on government property. We raided because promises were broken, Nakoma replied evenly. Keep your word, and we'll have no need for such desperate measures. The council disbanded with uneasy resolution. Outside, Sarah felt overwhelming exhaustion crash over her. She'd crossed lines she couldn't uncross, made choices that changed everything. But children would live who might have died. That truth mattered more than her comfort. Nakoma walked her back toward the missionary school to collect her belongings. The morning sun painted the prairie in gold and amber light. Despite everything, Sarah felt lighter than she had in 2 years. What will you do now? Nakoma asked. You have no position, no clear path forward. Sarah stopped walking. She looked at the reservation in the distance, then at Nakoma, then at her own hands that had stolen medicine and killed a man and kept her alive through impossible circumstances. These hands could do good work if she let them. She pulled out paper and pencil again, writing carefully, teach the children. Not civilization or Christianity, but reading and writing so they can defend themselves with words when needed. If your people will have me. Nakoma read the note twice. You choose to stay here? Living will be hard. Many whites won't accept you. Even some of my people will resist your presence. Sarah nodded firmly. She understood rejection and isolation intimately. But she also understood purpose, and felt it burning in her chest for the first time in years. Then you're welcome, Nakoma said, a smile spreading across his face. Grandmother Willow has been asking for someone to help teach. She says children need knowledge of both worlds to survive what's coming. They walked together in comfortable silence. At the missionary school, Mrs. Garrett met them with scandalized fury. Thief. Savage lover. You've disgraced us all. The words should have wounded, but Sarah barely felt them. She'd been called worse, had believed herself irredeemably broken. But Nakoma's acceptance, the gratitude in Grandmother Willow's eyes, the chance to help children survive, these things mattered more than gossip. She packed her belongings while Nakoma waited outside. The grass doll went into her trunk first, a reminder of innocent generosity. Her books followed, she'd need them for teaching. The small mirror caught her reflection, and Sarah studied herself with new eyes. Same face, same scars, but something essential had shifted. She looked less like a ghost and more like a woman who'd survived something terrible and chosen to keep surviving. Outside, Nakoma had brought a wagon for her trunks. They loaded everything in companionable silence. As they prepared to leave, Sarah felt her throat working, sounds forming for the first time in 2 years. They emerged rough and uncertain. Sarah. Just her name, barely more than a whisper, but it was speaking. Nakoma's eyes widened. Sarah, he repeated gently. A beautiful name for a warrior spirit. She tried again, pushing past pain and fear. Thank you. The words felt like broken glass leaving her throat, but they were hers. Real. Spoken. The silence that had protected her was finally cracking, letting light in. Nakoma took her hand, squeezing gently. You don't have to speak if you're not ready. But I'm honored to hear your voice when you choose to use it. They drove toward the reservation together, Sarah's trunks rattling in the wagon bed, the morning sun warm on their faces. She didn't know what the future held. There would be challenges, resistance, probably more heartbreak. But she also knew she'd found something precious, a place where her broken pieces fit, where her silence was understood, and where her voice, when it finally emerged fully, would be heard and valued. Grandmother Willow met them at the reservation entrance, the little girl who'd given Sarah the grass doll clutching the old woman's skirts. The child ran forward, wrapping small arms around Sarah's legs in fearless welcome. Sarah knelt down, pulling the grass doll from her pocket and returning it to its maker. The girl laughed, delighted, then pressed it back into Sarah's hands, a gift meant to be kept. In that moment, Sarah understood that healing wasn't about forgetting trauma or pretending damage never occurred. It was about finding people who saw your scars and valued you anyway, who understood that survival itself was a form of strength. Her voice would return fully in time, she knew now. But even in silence, she'd learned to speak truths that mattered. Nakoma stood beside her as the community gathered to welcome her, his presence solid and steady. They'd both lost so much, carried wounds that would never fully heal. But maybe that's what made them perfect for each other, two people who understood that broken things could still be beautiful, that silence and voice were both forms of communication, and that sometimes the bravest thing was choosing to keep living, keep hoping, keep fighting for a better future despite everything that tried to destroy you. The story of how a Lakota chief gave a silent woman back her voice would be told for generations. But those who lived it understood the deeper truth: he hadn't given her anything. He'd simply recognized what was already there, waiting for the right moment and the right reason to emerge. And she had given him something equally precious in return: faith that connection was still possible, that love could grow even in the hardest soil, and that choosing each other was its own form of revolution against a world that wanted to keep them separate and silent and small. Together, they would build something new. Not perfect, but real. Not painless, but worth fighting for. And Sarah's voice, when it returned fully, would tell stories that needed telling, of survival, resistance, love, and the power of refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. Her silence had been armor, but her voice would become a weapon for change. And that was worth everything she'd survived to reach this moment.